By evening, the archive would decide whether humans were people or property. That was how the younger stewards whispered it in the outer corridor, never in front of the vessels, never where the petition cameras could hear. Personhood sounded ceremonial when written in the concordance registry. In practice, it meant something simpler. If the third petition failed, Earth would not be invaded. It would be inventoried. Its old books would be purchased by collectors. Its languages would be indexed by linguists. Its graves would be mapped as cultural residue. Its living would remain useful, interesting, and legally unfinished. The humans had been warned not to bring sentiment to a legal hearing. They brought a pen, not a fleet record, not a sacred constitution, not a general, a priest, a survivor, or a child, a pen in a foam cradle, a shoebox of letters, a ledger whose pages looked, to the junior steward carrying it, like the account book of a small and unimportant life. Esh-Koral had almost refused the evidence before touching it. The first 2 human petitions had failed for obvious reasons. Humans could be brave, but predators were brave. Humans could mourn, but herd animals mourned. Humans could build hospitals and prisons with the same hands. And every species that had ever petitioned the concordance had arrived with examples chosen to make itself look coherent. The archive did not grant personhood because a species had beautiful exceptions. The archive granted personhood only when the exception proved the architecture. 47 letters did not look like architecture. A fountain pen did not look like architecture. A dead soldier named Joaquin Reyes did not look like the thing that would change a vote written, unofficially, before the hearing began. In Bay 9, the evidence cradle opened with a small breath of inert gas. The pen lay in the center as if it had been waiting for a hand. Esh-Koral extended an appendage, prepared to find performance, grief theater, the practiced sorrow of a species that still believed sincerity could be submitted as proof. The vessel lifted the artifact. Only then did the room begin to get heavier. The pen weighed 46 grams. That was the first thing Esh-Koral logged because weight was honest and humans were not. The artifact had arrived in Bay 9 of the Concordance Archive at 4:47 local time, sealed in a cradle of inert foam. The cradle had been opened by a junior steward whose name Esh-Koral did not bother to retrieve. The pen was a 1947 Scheffer Lifetime, gold-tipped, the barrel worn smooth where a thumb had pressed against it for years. Esh-Koral knew this because Esh-Koral could read it. Stratigraphic intent perception was not magic. It was a sense. The way smells was a sense. The vessels of the stratigraphic order perceived objects as layered geology of purpose. Every artifact carried sediment. The intentions of the hands that had used it, compressed into chemical residue, kinetic memory, the microscopic scars of pressure and angle. A weapon read as red and downward. A cup read as cyclical and warm. The pen in Esh-Koral's appendage read as repeated. Same angle, same pressure, same human year after year. 47 sessions, Esh-Koral logged. Long intervals, anniversary cadence. The species petition for Homo sapiens had been open for 140 concordance cycles. The humans wanted personhood, formal classification, a seat at the trade lattice, immunity from the salvage clause. The archive had already declined them twice. The first decline cited insufficient evidence of moral architecture. The second cited ledger-incompatible value systems. Esh-Koral had voted with the majority both times. The third review was today. The petition file contained 47 letters, the pen that wrote them, and the personal ledger of one Henry Wexler, born 1922, died 2003. The humans had submitted these in lieu of philosophical treatises. Esh-Koral had found that submission insulting. A species seeking personhood should send its theologians, not its bookkeepers. A second vessel watched from the upper gallery. Esh-Koral had not invited a witness. The archive had supplied one anyway. Seret of the outer ledger had served on the first 2 human reviews and had voted decline both times, with a precision the order admired. Seret's presence was a courtesy in the language of the archive and a warning in every other language. Third reviews rarely reverse, Seret said through the gallery channel. They sometimes do. They do not reverse on household artifacts. Esh-Koral kept the pen on the plate. The rules permit any evidence the petitioner believes load-bearing. The rules also permit embarrassment. The line should not have mattered. Vessels did not react to pressure from other vessels during a read. A reading was a sealed act. But Eschkharal found, with irritation, that the word household remained in the bay after Surratt had finished speaking. Household. Small. Beneath a species petition. The humans had brought the scale down so far that the archive itself seemed offended by the distance. Eschkharal logged the witness's presence and did not respond. If the pen proved hollow, Surratt would be right. If the pen proved otherwise, Surratt would still be useful. The archive believed institutional embarrassment was a contaminant. Humans, Eschkharal was beginning to suspect, might have built entire moral structures out of the things institutions preferred not to feel. "Begin layer 1, Eschkharal said, the bay lighting dimmed by protocol. Eschkharal lowered the pen onto the reading plate and let the sediment of intent rise. The first layer was performance. That was Eschkharal's immediate read, a performance of feeling calibrated for an audience. The human had written slowly. The pressure on the barrel was even, controlled, almost theatrical. No tremor, no interruption. A practiced gesture. Eschkharal noted this with something the vessels did not have a word for, but which the human translation field rendered as satisfaction. This was the species the humans had spent 140 cycles defending, a species that practiced its sorrow. Eschkharal lifted the first letter. Paper, American manufacture, post-war pulp. The salutation read, "Dear Anna." The date read, October 12, 1946. The closing read, "Yours, Henry." Eschkharal read the letter twice. There was nothing in it. No declaration of love, no confession, no request. The letter described the weather in Pittsburgh, the price of bread, the fact that the chestnut trees on Forbes Street had survived another winter. It mentioned a man named Reyes once, in the second paragraph, and said only this, "I think of him on Tuesdays." Then it returned to the weather. Eschkharal filed the read. Subject pattern, ritualized non-disclosure. Performance of restraint to imply depth. Standard morning theater. Recommendation pending further layers but trending toward second decline. The vessel reached for the second letter. October 12, 1947. Dear Anna, the weather, the bread, the chestnuts. I think of him on Tuesdays. Then the weather, the third letter, October 12, 1948. Same. Eschkharal paused for the first time since the bay had opened. 47 letters, one date, one name, one repeated sentence. 45 years. The vessel set the pen down and consulted the archive's classification matrix. There was no clause for what this was. There were clauses for grief, for tribute, for guilt, for atonement, for the inherited debts of war. None of them required this much patience. Eschkharal logged the read and moved to layer 2. The pen was waiting. It weighed 46 grams. It had written every letter. Somewhere in the worn, smooth place on the barrel was the shape of a thumb that had pressed there for 45 years every October on the same date, while writing the same 5 words about a man named Reyes. The vessel did not yet know what those 5 words cost. The Wexler ledger was a Meade composition notebook, black and white marbled cover, college-ruled, 96 pages. Eschkharal lifted it with a different appendage, ceremonial secondary, the one used for objects suspected of bias. The ledger had a smell the bay's sensor field rendered as paper aged in dry air. No smoke, no rot, kept clean. 45 years of clean. Eschkharal logged that detail and moved past it. The first page bore a single line in the same handwriting as the letters, Anza, 12 October 1944, resupply route Charlie, my order, no other text. The next page was blank. The page after that was blank. Eschkharal flipped forward. Page 13 had an entry. Anza, 12 October 1945. Resupply route Charlie, my order. Then blank pages. Then page 26. Anza, 12 October 1946. Resupply route Charlie, my order. 45 entries.
Same date.
Same wording. The handwriting aged across the pages, pressure changing, lines softening, the loop of the G in order opening wider as the man got older, but the words did not change. Eschkharal consulted the petition file. Reyes. Sergeant Joaquin Reyes, United States Army, killed in action at Anzio, Italy, October 12, 1944. Supply route designated Charlie. Survived by wife Anna Reyes of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Currently aged 81. Currently alive. Currently the recipient of 47 letters about chestnut trees. The vessel set the ledger down. Subject classification update. Wexler, Henry, veteran. Logistics officer. Direct administrative authority over Reyes's final assignment. Ledger entries indicate self-attribution of operational responsibility for Reyes's death. Eschkharal paused, then added, letters do not reference responsibility. Ledger does. 2 parallel records. One is the truth. One is the performance. The vessel did not yet know which was which. Bay 9 lit a soft bear along the rim of the reading plate. The archive was prompting HFY to declare a preliminary tier. The third review was a procedural matter. Humans had been declined twice. The third decline would be permanent, and HFY had been chosen for this read because HFY had cast a clean vote both prior times. The order favored consistency. HFY declared nothing yet. Instead, the vessel lifted the pen again and weighed it. 46 grams. The worn smooth place on the barrel was the size of a human thumb pad, and the wear was deep. A pen used hard, a pen used long. A pen that had been a tool, not an ornament. The pen was also empty. HFY had not noted this on the first pass. The ink chamber was dry. The nib was clean. The pen had not held ink in. The archive's spectral read returned the answer immediately. 41 years. The last ink residue dated to 1988. The 47th letter was written in 1988. October 12. Dear Anna, the weather, the bread, the chestnuts. I think of him on Tuesdays. After 1988, the pen had been kept but not used. HFY logged the anomaly. A man who wrote one letter a year for 45 years stopped after the 47th. He did not throw the pen away. He did not refill it. He kept it on his desk. The estate notes recorded that the pen had been found on the desk, capped, beside a framed photograph of two soldiers in front of a jeep. The photograph was in the petition file. HFY had not looked at it yet. The vessel looked at it now. Two men, American uniforms. The taller one had his arm around the shorter one's shoulders. The shorter one was smiling. The taller one was not. The caption on the back of the photograph, in the same handwriting as the letters in the ledger, read, Joaquin and me, Anza staging area, 3 days before. HFY set the photograph down and lifted the second letter again. This time, the vessel read the sentence about Reyes more slowly. I think of him on Tuesdays. The archive's translation field offered 6 possible readings. 5 of them were performative. The 6th was technical. A statement of scheduling, an admission that the thinking occurred at regular intervals, that it had been placed inside the structure of a week. HFY filed the 6th reading separately. It did not yet match the classification matrix. It weighed more than the other 5. The vessel moved to layer 3. The bay dimmed further. The pen waited. Layer 3 was the kinetic record, the way the hand had moved, the angle of approach, the moments of hesitation. Stratigraphic intent perception read kinetic memory as a topology, a landscape of pauses and pressures. A good reader could tell whether a hand had been hurried or steady, whether it had stopped to think or stopped to weep. HFY read letter 7 first. 1952. The sentence about race had been written without hesitation. No pause before, no pause after. The pen had moved at the same speed as the description of the chestnut trees. There was no kinetic signal of grief. There was no kinetic signal of guilt. The sentence was, in every measurable way, identical in execution to the price of bread. HFY logged this and moved to letter 14, 1959, same letter 22, 1967, same letter 30, 1975, same letter 47, 1988, same. The man had written one sentence about a dead man 47 times, on 47 anniversaries, with the same controlled pressure, the same steady rhythm, the same kinetic profile as the weather report that surrounded it. The vessel filed the read under ritualized non-disclosure, advanced. The species was confirmed performative. A man so practiced at his own grief that he could write it without feeling it. A man who had mastered his ledger so completely that the ledger itself had become the mourning. HFY was almost ready to declare the second tier. The archive lights brightened, prompting again. HFY overrode the prompt and lifted the ledger one more time. The ledger entries were not the same. HFY had missed it on the first pass. The kinetic record of the ledger was not the kinetic record of the letters. The ledger entries were pressed harder. The pen had dug into the paper. The downstrokes of the R in order had nearly punctured the page in 1944 and had grown softer over the decades but had never become light. Where the letters had a flat pressure profile, controlled, deliberate, performed. The ledger entries had a profile the Bayes analysis field labeled. In its driest taxonomic voice, a mechanical force inconsistent with thoughtful inscription. Recommended classification. Unconscious motor activity under duress. The man had written the letters with care. The man had written the ledger as if trying to drive the words into the paper. Corral set the ledger down. This was not yet a contradiction the archive's classification matrix could resolve. The matrix had a clause for compartmentalized grief, the practice of holding multiple emotional registers in separate spaces. Many species did this, but the matrix's clause assumed that one register would be the performance and the other would be the truth. It did not assume that both could be ledgers. The vessel stood very still. Outside Bay 9, the archive moved through its ordinary cycles. A junior steward passed the door. A cataloging drone returned a case to its cradle. The ordinary patience of an institution that had outlasted 6 previous species petitions and was preparing, today, to decline a 7th. HFY consulted the petition file again. The humans had submitted these 47 letters and this one ledger because, the petition argued, in language HFY had previously dismissed. The architecture of our moral life is not in our treaties. It is in what we keep. HFY had read that line and registered it as rhetoric. The vessel reread it now. The architecture of our moral life is not in our treaties. It is in what we keep. The vessel did not know yet what Henry Wexler had kept. HFY knew about the pen and the letters and the ledger and the photograph. None of those individually was an architecture. Architecture was structure across time. Architecture was load-bearing. The vessel looked again at the worn, smooth place on the barrel of the pen. The thumbprint had been pressed into the metal by repetition. 45 years of pressure in the same place. The pen was load-bearing. HFY lifted letter 8, 1953. Dear Anna, the weather, the bread, the chestnuts. I think of him on Tuesdays. The vessel had been wrong about which sentence was the performance. The widow's records were not in the petition file. HFY had to request them separately. The archive's clearance system permitted it. A Tier 3 vessel reviewing a species petition was authorized to expand the evidence base. But the request required justification, and HFY wrote one word in the justification field: recipient. The clearance returned in 7 minutes. Anna Reyes, born 1923, currently of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, currently aged 81, currently in a single-room care facility on the 3rd floor of a building that had once been a Catholic girls' school. The archive had her medical records, her tax filings, her census entries, her library checkouts. The vessel scrolled past these. The vessel was looking for the letters. She had kept all 47. They were in a shoebox, in the bottom drawer of the bureau in her care facility room, beneath a stack of folded handkerchiefs and a mass card from 1972. The archive had a photograph of the contents of the drawer, taken during the routine inventory the petition process required. The shoebox was a Florsheim, men's size 10, the same shoebox Joaquin Reyes had used to send a pair of dress shoes home to his wife in September of 1944. Anna had kept the shoebox. She had put the letters inside it. The recipient mattered because the recipient had been given power. That was the first revised note HFY wrote in the private margin, and the vessel disliked the imprecision of it. Power, in archive usage, usually meant authority, enforcement capacity, control over outcome. Anna Reyes had none of those. She could not reverse the order that sent her husband to Route Charlie. She could not punish Henry Wexler. She could not reopen a battlefield or call a dead man back from Anzio. And yet for 47 years, Henry had written as if she held something over him that no ministry could file. Not revenge, not forgiveness, not even judgment. Continuance. If Anna stopped answering, the Tuesday sentence would become a confession performed into an empty room. If Henry stopped writing, Anna would be left alone with a day the world had already moved past. Neither of them named the arrangement, perhaps because naming it would have made it smaller. They had built a bridge out of weather reports and bread prices because the bridge could not bear the weight of the word guilt, not spoken directly, not every year, not without collapsing. The archive had clauses for debts. It did not have one for 2 people agreeing, without ever agreeing, that a dead man would continue to have a Tuesday. HFY logged this without comment. The archive also had Anna Reyes's correspondence records. She had written 47 letters in return. They had been sent to the address on the envelopes, a post office box in Pittsburgh, registered to Henry Wexler, and Henry Wexler had kept them too. They were in a metal box in his attic, found by the estate executor in 2003. Photographed for the petition file, 47 envelopes. The archive had not opened them. HFY had not noticed this either on the first pass. The vessel opened the file now. The letters from Anna Reyes were short, 3 to 5 sentences each. They described the weather in Pittsburgh, the chestnut trees on Forbes Street, the price of bread. The closing sentence on every one of the 47 letters read, "I think of him on Tuesdays." Same words, same date, same 5 words. The two of them had been writing the same letter to each other for 45 years. Esh Corral set the file down and held the pen. The vessel did not have a clause for this. The vessel's classification matrix did not have a clause for this. The archive did not have a clause for this. Esh Corral had read 3,040 species records over the course of 900 cycles and had never encountered an artifact that returned this reading. 2 people. 1 sentence. 45 years. A widow and the officer who had given her husband the order that killed him. Neither had ever said it. Neither had needed to. The sentence had carried it. Tuesdays, because Joaquin had been killed on a Tuesday. October 12, 1944 had been a Tuesday. The sentence was not about thinking. The sentence was about keeping the day held. Esh Corral logged the read. Then the vessel did something vessels did not do during review. Esh Corral closed the reading plate, dimmed the bay to minimum, and sat in the quiet for 192 seconds. The archive recorded the pause and flagged it. A vessel of Tier 3 did not pause during a 3rd review. A vessel of Tier 3 had already decided. The pause meant the decision was not yet final. The pause meant something in the read had moved the vessel. Esh Corral was aware of the flag. Esh Corral did not care. There were 39 more letters to read, and the ledger had not been fully transcribed, and the petition was due before the archive's evening cycle, and the vessel was, for the first time in 900 cycles, uncertain how to log what was in front of him. The pen weighed 46 grams. It had been used for 41 years. It had been kept for 15 more years after that, capped on a desk beside a photograph of 2 men in front of a Jeep. The man with his arm around the shorter man's shoulders, the man who was not smiling. The vessel reopened the reading plate. Letter 9, 1954. Dear Anna, the weather, the bread, the chestnuts. I think of him on Tuesdays. Esh Corral began the read. Letter 9 led to letter 10. Letter 10 led to 11. Esh Corral read them in order, as the man had written them, and the vessel's kinetic pressure analysis ran continuously underneath the surface read. The performance of the letters did not change. The pressure of the ledger did not change. The 2 records ran in parallel, never touching, never acknowledging each other, until 1961. Letter 17, October 12, 1961. The vessel almost missed it. The first 3 paragraphs were the same. The weather, warmer than usual. The bread, gone up to 23 cents. The chestnut trees. One had been cut down, but a new one had been planted in its place. Then the sentence, I think of him on Tuesdays. Then a 4th paragraph the previous 16 letters did not have. I am writing to tell you that I have taken a new job at the State Department of Veterans Affairs. I will be administering compensation files for surviving spouses. I thought you should know. That was all. No explanation, no justification, no connection to the rest of the letter. A single piece of information dropped into a letter about chestnuts. Esh Corral consulted the Wexler personnel record. The man had been a bookkeeper at a steel mill in Pittsburgh from 1945 to 1961. In September of 1961, he had resigned the steel mill position and applied to the Pennsylvania Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. He had administered survivor benefit claims from 1961 to 1989, 28 years. The records showed that Henry Wexler had personally reviewed 11,446 survivor benefit claims over his 28 years in that office. The archive did not have data on whether he had approved more of them than the average reviewer or fewer. The archive had data on something else. The archive had data on his recusals. Henry Wexler had recused himself from every claim filed by a family from the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. The 442nd had been Reyes's unit. The recusals had been logged with the personnel office and stamped personal conflict. 83 recusals over 28 years. Every one of them had been forwarded to a different reviewer. Every one of them had been approved at a rate of 96%, slightly higher than the office average. Esh Corral logged this and read it again. The man had not approved Reyes's family's compensation claim because the man had recused himself from every claim that came from a family like Reyes's. He had not wanted to be the one who said yes or no. He had wanted the decision to be made by someone who did not know. But he had also chosen the job. He had left the steel mill and taken the job that put him next to those decisions every day for 28 years. And then he had refused to make the decisions himself. Eshkaral set the file down. The classification matrix had a clause for self-imposed proximity to consequence. It was a clause that came up rarely. It usually appeared in records of species that practiced ritualized vul, the perpetual mourning of cultures that built temples beside the graves of their dead. The clause noted that proximity to consequence behaviors could be either performative, designed for an audience, or load-bearing, functional within the moral architecture of the individual. The archive's standard test for distinguishing the two was the audience test. A performative behavior had an audience. A load-bearing behavior did not. Henry Wexler had told no one about the recusals. They were buried in personnel files no living person had read until the archive had requested them. He had told no one about the letters. He had told no one about the ledger. He had told Anna Reyes nothing. Not in 1944, not in 1961, not in 1988. He had carried it alone. There was no audience. Eshkaral logged the second reading. Then the vessel did something else vessels did not do during review. Eshkaral reread the petition's opening line. The architecture of our moral life is not in our treaties. It is in what we keep. The vessel had previously read this as rhetoric. The vessel had then read it as architecture. The vessel now read it as a description of method. The humans had not been arguing that their morality was good. They had been arguing that it was built, that it required ongoing labor, that it took the form of repeated acts across decades, that it could not be inspected in a single moment because it was load-bearing across time. Eshkaral lifted letter 18, 1962. Dear Anna, the weather, the bread, the chestnuts, I think of him on Tuesdays. The vessel began the read. By letter 23, Eshkaral had constructed a working theory. The theory was elegant. The theory was wrong. The theory was this. Henry Wexler had developed a personal accounting system for the moral debt he believed he owed. The debt had a clear origin, the order to raise, a clear creditor, Anna Reyes, and a clear payment schedule, 1 letter per year, 1 recusal per claim, 1 ledger entry per anniversary. The system was not designed to discharge the debt. The system was designed to service the debt, to make annual payments against a principal that could not be repaid, the way a tenant pays rent on a property he will never own. The theory called this covenant of compounding, and predicted that the man's behavior would conform to the pattern for the duration of his life. Eshkaral logged the theory and tested it against letters 24 through 47. The theory held. Each letter conformed. Each ledger entry conformed. The recusals continued at a steady rate of 3 per year, with no variation. The chestnut trees grew or were cut down. The bread went up. The man wrote the same 5 words about Tuesdays. Eshkaral logged the validation and prepared the tier recommendation. Tier 2, conditional personhood, limited trade access. The archive would accept the human petition under a covenant-keeping clause that already existed in the matrix, a clause originally written for the Bellum Harry, a species that maintained centuries-long oath bonds with their ancestors. The Wexler material would be cited as evidence that humans were capable of structured, load-bearing moral practice across decades. It was a strong recommendation. It would reverse 2 previous declines. It would seat the humans at the trade lattice. The order would record Eshkaral's read as a model case. The vessel was prepared to file. Eshkaral picked up the pen one more time ceremonially, the way a vessel of Tier 3 closed a file. 46 grams. Worn, smooth place on the barrel. Dry ink chamber. Capped. The vessel paused. The pen was capped. Eshkaral had logged this at the beginning of the read. The pen had been found capped on the desk beside the photograph. The vessel had logged it as a routine detail. The vessel had not waited. Eshkaral waited now. A man who used a pen for 41 years and then stopped using it would ordinarily put the pen in a drawer, or throw it away, or pass it on. A capped pen on a desk was not storage. A capped pen on a desk was availability. The pen had been positioned to be picked up again. For 15 years until the man's death, the pen had been within arm's reach, but the ink had been gone since 1988. Eshkaral consulted the estate inventory. The desk had also contained the vessel scrolled, a bottle of Schaffer Script Royal Blue ink, sealed, unopened, dated 1988. Purchased the same year as the 47th letter. Never opened. Esh-Karal read the entry twice. The man had bought ink in 1988 and had never used it. He had bought ink and capped the pen and kept the pen on the desk and never refilled it. For 15 years. The covenant of compounding theory did not account for this. The theory predicted continued payment. The theory did not predict a man who had bought the next year's ink and then stopped writing. Esh-Karal set the pen down. The vessel had been about to file. The vessel did not file. Instead, Esh-Karal opened the estate file again. The full inventory, the parts the vessel had previously skipped because they had seemed irrelevant. There were photographs of the desk drawer. The drawer contained the sealed bottle of ink, 3 blank composition notebooks, med, college-ruled, identical to the ledger, a stack of postage stamps from 1989 still affixed to a sheet, and one envelope. One envelope, addressed to Anna Reyes, post office box in Pittsburgh. Stamped, sealed, never sent. Esh-Karal had not opened the file's image of the envelope. The vessel opened it now. The envelope's postmark field was blank. The archive's spectral red indicated the letter had been written on October 12, 1989, sealed the same day, addressed the same day, and never placed in a mailbox. It had been in the desk drawer for 14 years. The 48th letter. Esh-Karal logged the existence of the 48th letter and did not yet open it. The vessel set down the file. The covenant of compounding theory was wrong. There was something else. The pen had been capped because the man had decided to stop. The ink had been bought because the man had not yet decided. The 48th letter had been written because the man had decided again, and then the letter had not been sent. Esh-Karal did not know why. The vessel was about to find out. The 48th letter was 3 sentences long. Esh-Karal read it on the archive's spectral plate, through the unopened envelope, because protocol forbade the physical opening of an artifact that had been preserved in a sealed state for over a decade. The spectral read returned the text in clean, legible English. Anna, I am dying. I never told you that I gave him the order. That was all. No closing, no signature. No date inside the letter itself, only on the postmark field, which had remained blank because the letter had never gone through a post office. 3 sentences, 21 words, a confession. Esh-Karal filed the read and waited for the vessel's own systems to settle. The archive's secondary translation field offered the standard 9 readings of a deathbed confession. The vessel discarded 8 of them immediately. The 9th was the only reading that fit the file. A man who had carried something alone for 45 years had written the truth on the 45th anniversary of the event, had sealed it, had addressed it, had then put it in a drawer and never sent it. The vessel logged the read. Then Esh-Karal did something the vessel had been moving toward for the entire review slowly, without quite knowing it. The vessel filed a complete reclassification. The covenant theory was wrong. The covenant theory had predicted continued service. The covenant theory had predicted a payment schedule. The covenant theory had not predicted a man who reached the end of his life, wrote the truth, and then could not bear to deliver it. The new theory was simpler and harder. The new theory was this. Henry Wexler had spent 45 years building a system designed to spare Anna Reyes from the truth. The letters about chestnut trees, the Tuesday sentence, the recusals at the Veterans Affairs Office, which had ensured that he would never be the man who signed off on the compensation payment that recognized her loss officially. The ledger, kept private, where the truth lived. Every act in the system had been calibrated to keep Anna from learning what Henry had done. The 48th letter, the deathbed confession, had been the breaking point of the system. The man had written it. The man had been unable to send it. The system had held. The pen on the desk, capped, with the unopened bottle of ink beside it, had been the proof that the system had won. The man had stopped writing because he had run out of weather to describe. He had stopped writing because the truth had finally pressed too hard against the surface of the chestnut trees. Esh-Karal logged this theory under the Matrix's clause for protective concealment as moral architecture. It was a clause that existed but was rarely invoked. The clause noted that concealment behaviors could be morally weighted when their purpose was the protection of another. The clause required evidence of self-cost. The recusals were the self-cost. The unsent letter was the self-cost. The 41 years of writing about bread were the self-cost. The vessel filed the recommendation. Tier 2 approved. The species petition would proceed. The archive would record the case as a clean example of protective covenant and would add a paragraph to the petition's positive citation referencing the Wexler material. The order would log Eschkarl's read as a model. Eschkarl closed the file. It was a good read. It was a complete read. It accounted for the pen, the letters, the ledger, the recusals, the unopened ink, the unsent envelope, and the photograph. It accounted for the man and the widow and the dead sergeant and the 45 years between them. The vessel turned to leave Bay 9. The archive lights brightened along the rim, prompting acknowledgement of the filed recommendation. Eschkarl moved to acknowledge. And then the vessel stopped. There was one record Eschkarl had not requested. The archive had the personnel files, the correspondence records, the estate inventory, the photographs, the spectral read of the unopened envelope. The archive did not have the records from Anna Reyes herself, not the letters she had written, and Henry had kept, which Eschkarl had already read, but Anna's own private papers, her own diaries, her own ledger, if she had kept one. A widow of 81 years had lived 61 years past her husband's death. She had received 47 letters. She had written 47 in return. She had kept the letters in a shoebox in a drawer. The archive had not asked what else was in the drawer. Eschkarl filed a new request. The bay lights waited. The vessel did not yet know that the recommendation already filed was correct in every detail and wrong in its premise. The system Henry Wexler had built had not been built to spare Anna Reyes from the truth. Anna Reyes had already known the truth. She had known it since 1944. But Eschkarl did not know that yet. The vessel believed the file was closed. The vessel filed the recommendation. The archive logged the recommendation as final. It was the most complete error Eschkarl had ever made. The widow's private papers arrived in Bay 9 14 minutes after the request was filed. The archive's secondary protocols had flagged them, scanned them, and forwarded them to Eschkarl's reading plate with a note from the cataloging desk. Vessel, please confirm receipt. Personal effects of A. Reyes. Note item 3. Eschkarl opened the file. Item 1, a Bible Catholic edition English with marginalia in Spanish. Item 2, a rosary, wood beads worn thin. Item 3, a Mead composition notebook, black and white marbled cover, college ruled 96 pages. Identical to Henry Wexler's ledger, bought from the same line of school supplies. The first entry was dated October 14, 1944. Eschkarl lifted the entry to the spectral plate. 2 letters today. The Army one came first, Henry Wexler's came second. The Army's said Joaquin died on the route. Henry said Joaquin died on the route. Henry said other things. Henry did not know that Joaquin had written to me on the 11th and told me he had been ordered onto the route. He had told me whose order it was. I know already what Henry will not say. Eschkarl read the entry twice. Then the vessel read item 3's entries in sequence. October 12, 1945. Henry sent a letter today about the weather. He thinks I do not know. October 12, 1946. Henry sent a letter today about the bread. He thinks I do not know. I will not tell him. October 12, 1947. Henry sent a letter today about the chestnuts. I will not tell him for as long as he keeps writing. The pattern continued. 47 entries, 1 per year. The widow had known. The widow had known since 2 days after her husband's death. The widow had decided, alone in the first week of her widowhood, that Henry Wexler did not need to be told that she knew. She had let him write his letters about chestnut trees for 45 years. She had written back about chestnut trees for 45 years. She had used the same 5 words about Tuesdays because he had used them first, and she had wanted him to know that the message had been received and that the message did not need to be opened. Eschkarl filed the recommendation correction immediately. The system Henry Wexler had built had not been the architecture. The system Anna Reyes had built around Henry's system, the system of receiving, of keeping, of writing back about chestnut trees while knowing, was the architecture. Henry had been building a wall. Anna had been holding the wall up from the other side. The vessel set the plate down and sat in the quiet for 490 seconds. The archive flagged the pause. Eschkarl did not care. The vessel had filed a Tier 2 recommendation under the Protective Concealment Clause. The clause was wrong. The clause assumed concealment from a single direction. What had happened between Henry Wexler and Anna Reyes was not concealment. It was a mutual covenant of unspoken knowledge, a covenant that had required both of them to participate, neither of them to acknowledge for 45 years in writing on the same date with the same 5 words. The classification matrix had no clause for this. Esch-Korel consulted the matrix. There was no clause. The vessel opened the matrix's authoring protocol. A Tier 3 vessel could propose new clauses. Proposals required a model case, a structural definition, and a name. The name was the hardest part. The vessel had been authoring clauses for 900 cycles and had never named one easily. Names had to capture both the structure and the cost. Esch-Korel did not name it yet. The vessel opened item 3 again and read forward through Anna Reyes's entries. 1972. Henry has taken a job with Veterans Affairs. I read about it in the paper. He is keeping his hands away from our file. 1981. Henry's letter came on time. He is getting older. The handwriting is softer. 1988. Henry's letter came on time. It will be the last one. I can read it in the pressure. He has been deciding for a year. Esch-Korel lifted the entry. The widow had known the 47th letter would be the last. She had known before he had written it. She had read it in the pressure of his hand on the page. The same kinetic signal Esch-Korel had read on the spectral plate 200 cycles after the fact. Anna Reyes had been doing, by hand, by feel, by 44 years of practice, what the vessels of the stratigraphic order did with their entire sense. The vessel had been wrong about which species in this exchange was the reader. Esch-Korel filed the second correction. The bay lights brightened. There was one more entry in Anna Reyes's ledger. October 12, 1989, the same date as the unsent 48th letter. The widow had not received that letter because the letter had never been sent. The ledger entry for October 12, 1989 was therefore written by a woman who had not heard from Henry Wexler that year and who did not know that he had written a letter and not sent it. The entry read, "No letter today. He has stopped. I will write one anyway. The chestnut on Forbes Street has grown 6 feet since the new one was planted. The bread is up. I think of him on Tuesdays. I am writing this to no one. I am writing it because we did this for 45 years and it should not stop because one of us forgot how." The next entry was October 12, 1990. Same. October 12, 1991. Same. Anna Reyes had continued writing letters to Henry Wexler after he had stopped writing to her. She had continued for 14 years. She had not sent them. She had written them into her own ledger on the anniversary, every year, the same 5 words about Tuesdays. The archive had her entries. The entries continued through 2003, the year of Henry's death, and then through 2004, 2005. She was 81. She was still writing. Esch-Korel set the ledger down. The vessel did not have a clause for this either. The matrix had a clause for ritual continuance, practices maintained beyond the original context that had produced them. Clause noted that such continuances were typically performative, addressed to a community of ritual participants. The clause did not account for a ritual continued in isolation, with no community, by a single person, addressed to a dead correspondent who had been dead for 2 anniversaries. The vessel opened the authoring protocol again. This time, Esch-Korel began to write. The new clause would have to account for the following: that a moral architecture could be built jointly by 2 parties, neither of whom acknowledged that they were building it; that it could be load-bearing without being spoken; that it could be continued by one party after the other had died, without becoming performative, because the structure of the original covenant had been internalized so deeply by both parties that the continuance was not commemoration but maintenance, that the moral cost of such an architecture was the carrying, that the cost was not paid once at the origin, but paid continuously in small denominations across decades by acts as small as the price of bread. Esch-Korel wrote the structural definition first, then the model case, then the vessel paused at the name. The archive's standard naming convention required a single term, a noun, in the vessel's working language. That could be cross-referenced into the petition matrix and applied to other species when relevant cases arose. The term had to be honest. It had to describe the thing without flattering or condemning it. Esch-Korel wrote, "Tuesday keeping." The vessel held the term against the case. The term fit. The term named the practice. The term named the cost. Esch-Korel filed the clause. The archive logged it. The order's clause review protocols would examine it within the next cycle. The protocols required a justifying citation, a piece of evidence from the model case that demonstrated the clause's necessity. The standard citation was a quote. Vessels were not, by training, in the habit of quoting human writing. Human writing tended to be either too verbose or too sentimental for the archive's load-bearing language. But the vessel had a sentence. HFY cited, "I think of him on Tuesdays." The archive accepted the citation. The vessel sat in the quiet for 192 seconds. Outside Bay 9, the ordinary cycle of the archive continued. The drones returned cases. The junior stewards walked past the door. The order met in its eastern quadrant and reviewed the day's filings, including a new clause from vessel of Tier 3 HFY, named Tuesday Keeping, model case Wexler over Reyes, recommended tier not yet specified. HFY had not yet specified the tier. The vessel was now sitting with a problem the vessel had not anticipated when the bay had opened at 4:47. The problem was this. The Wexler over Reyes case had been submitted by the humans as evidence for personhood. The humans had argued, in their petition language, that the architecture of their moral life was in what they kept. The vessel had now read the architecture. The vessel had named the architecture. The vessel had filed a new clause that the matrix had not previously contained. The vessel was now required to recommend a tier. Tier 2 had been the previous recommendation. Tier 2 would be the safe recommendation. Tier 2 would accept the humans into limited trade and conditional personhood and would close the file in a way the order would record as competent. HFY was no longer sure Tier 2 was honest. The vessel reread the unsent 48th letter one more time through the sealed envelope on the spectral plate. "Anna, I am dying. I never told you that I gave him the order." The vessel reread Anna Reyes's October 1944 entry. "I know already what Henry will not say." The two sentences were the same sentence, written from two sides of a wall, 45 years apart, by two people who had decided in the first week of their respective widowhoods, Anna's widowhood from her husband, Henry's widowhood from his innocence, that the wall would be load-bearing and that neither of them would knock it down. HFY logged the read. Then the vessel turned to the pen. The pen had been the artifact at the center of the petition because the humans, in their submission, had understood something the vessel had not at first credited them with understanding, that the architecture of a moral life could be located in a single object that the architecture passed through, the way a load passes through a beam. Henry Wexler had written every letter with this pen. He had written every ledger entry with this pen. He had bought the next year's ink in 1988 and capped the pen and kept it on the desk for 15 years, because the pen was where the architecture lived. The pen was the beam. The vessel weighed it, 46 grams. There was a worn, smooth place on the barrel where Henry's thumb had pressed against it for 45 years. HFY had logged the worn place at 4:47 and had not yet examined it stratigraphically. The vessel examined it now. The stratigraphic intent perception read the worn place layer by layer, pressure intensity, angle of approach, microscopic kinetic memory, and returned the standard topology of long-term contact. A right-handed grip, a consistent angle, a man holding a pen to write. The vessel was about to log the read as routine. The vessel paused. The angle was wrong. HFY consulted the photograph of Henry Wexler and Joaquin Reyes in front of the Jeep, Anza staging area 3 days before October 12. In the photograph, Henry's right arm was around Joaquin's shoulders. Henry's right hand rested on Joaquin's collarbone. The hand was the hand of a right-handed man, but the wear on the pen was the wear of a left-handed grip. HFY consulted the personnel file. Henry Wexler had been right-handed at the time of his enlistment in 1942. He had been right-handed when he had given Reyes the order on October 11, 1944. He had been right-handed in the photograph taken 3 days before that. He had been left-handed by October 12, 1946, the date of the first letter. The vessel scrolled the medical record. Henry Wexler had been hospitalized for 2 days in November of 1944, 3 weeks after the resupply route, for what the Army's documentation called non-combat injury to the right hand. No further detail, no surgical note, no discharge summary. The man had been hospitalized, briefly, and had emerged left-handed, and had written every letter with his left hand for the rest of his life on a pen that had become an instrument of left-handed remembrance. the right-handed hand of the man who had given the order having been removed from the writing. Deliberately, the vessel logged, deliberately removed for 45 years. Eshkoral filed the read. Then the vessel did something vessels did not do. The vessel wrote in the personal log a sentence the matrix would not require. He did not want the same hand to write the letters. The vessel held the sentence against the pen. The thumbprint was on the wrong side of the barrel. It was on the left side. The wear was deep and old and consistent, and it was on the left side, because for 45 years Henry Wexler had used a different hand to do this work, because the hand that had written the order to Reyes was not the hand he had been willing to let touch Anna Reyes's name on an envelope. The vessel set the pen down. The archive recorded the pause. Eshkoral did not care. The moral cost of the Wexler architecture had not been the letters or the ledger or the recusals or the 45 years of writing about bread. The moral cost had been in a hand. The man had done something to his own right hand. In November of 1944, the documentation of which the Army had buried under the phrase non-combat injury, and which the man had never explained in any letter, in any ledger entry, in any record the archive could find. He had paid the cost in flesh. Then he had paid it again every October 12 for 45 years in chestnut trees. The vessel filed the read. The bay was very quiet. The vessel did not move. There was a doctrine in the stratigraphic order, older than the matrix, older than the species classification protocol, older than the concordance archive itself, that a vessel encountering a case that exceeded the matrix should default to the matrix anyway. The doctrine was called hold the beam. It existed because the order had been founded after a period in which vessels had revised classifications too eagerly, on the strength of single anomalous reads, and had let 3 species into the trade lattice that had not yet been ready. The doctrine taught restraint. The doctrine taught that the matrix was load-bearing for reasons the individual vessel might not see in a single bay. Eshkoral had been trained in the doctrine for 900 cycles. The doctrine said, file Tier 2. Close the case. The protective concealment clause was sufficient. The Wexler material was a strong instance of an existing category. The matrix did not need to be amended. The vessel did not need to invent a new axis. 5-to-1 with 2 pending was a thin margin. The amendment would be cited in future order debates as the moment a single vessel had been moved by sentiment and had overbuilt the matrix on the strength of 1 pen. The doctrine said, the hand is a detail. Many men switched hands after the war. The medical record was thin. The vessel was reading too much into the wear pattern. The doctrine said, file Tier 2. Walk back to Bay 9. Close the file. The species would have personhood. The covenant would be cited. The 48 letters would be preserved. The Wexler over Reyes case would be documented under an existing clause, and the matrix would remain intact. Eshkoral considered the doctrine. The vessel sat at the workstation in Bay 9 with the pen on the reading plate and the unsent 48th letter beside it, and the ledger and the photographs and the Anna Reyes 1944 entry and the medical record and the wear on the left side of the barrel, and considered the doctrine for 192 seconds. The doctrine was correct. The doctrine was load-bearing. The doctrine had been written for cases like this, cases in which a single vessel had been moved. Eshkoral was moved. The vessel logged this in the personal record, not in the matrix, not in the species file. In the personal record, where it would not be load-bearing, the vessel is moved. Then Eshkoral consulted the doctrine one more time. Hold the beam had a subclause. The subclause was rarely cited. It read, a vessel may revise the matrix when the matrix has failed to read a load it was designed to read. The failure must be demonstrable. The revision must be the smallest revision necessary to read the load. The vessel must defend the revision in person before the inner reading. The matrix had been designed to read moral architecture. The matrix had failed to read the Wexler over Reyes architecture. The failure was demonstrable. The matrix had no clause for undeclared, mutual, decades-long covenant maintenance by 2 parties, neither of whom acknowledged the covenant existed. The required revision was the smallest possible. 1 new clause, 1 new axis, 1 new citation. The vessel could defend the revision in person. The doctrine permitted it. The doctrine, in its older and more honest reading, required it. Eshkoral stood up. The vessel walked the 400 meters to the eastern quadrant of the order. The walk was deliberate. The walk was the resistance. The vessel had been ready to file Tier 2 and close the case, and the walk to the order was the act of choosing not to. Every step was a vote. The stratigraphic order recorded the gait of its vessels and could read the kinetic memory of any walk taken on its corridors, and Esh-Karal's gait on this walk was logged, later, by the archive's review team, as steady, weighted, the gait of a vessel choosing the harder reading. The vessel entered the eastern quadrant. The first reader was waiting. The first reader had been waiting since the vessel had filed the Tier 2 recommendation, because the first reader had read the file behind Esh-Karal, and had known, as senior readers sometimes knew, that the Tier 2 recommendation was not going to be the final one. The first reader said, "You have come to revise." Esh-Karal confirmed. The first reader said, "Present the load." Esh-Karal presented the pen. The 7 vessels of the inner reading received the file in silence. The first reader scrolled the spectral evidence. The second reader scrolled the ledger correlations. The fourth reader scrolled the medical record and the hand switch finding. The 7th reader, who was the oldest and who had voted against the human petition more often than any of them, read the unsent 48th letter and the Ana Reyes 1944 entry and the "I know already what Henry will not say" line, and read it again. The 7th reader said nothing for 92 seconds. Then the 7th reader said, "The clause name is Tuesday keeping." Esh-Karal confirmed. The 7th reader said, "It is not Wexler that the clause is named for. It is not Reyes, it is the day." Esh-Karal confirmed. The 7th reader said, "The day is the load-bearing element." Esh-Karal confirmed. The 7th reader filed an affirmation. The 1st, 2nd, and 4th readers filed affirmations. The 3rd and 5th readers requested 40 cycles to review the matrix amendment. The 6th reader filed a dissent. The vote stood at 5-1 with 2 pending. The amendment passed under the order's threshold rule for emergency revisions. The species classification protocol was amended within 47 minutes of Esh-Karal's presentation. The matrix was updated to include the covenant capacity axis. The Tuesday keeping clause was integrated. The model case Wexler over Reyes was filed as the cited evidence. The citation reading "I think of him on Tuesdays." The human petition was reopened. The archive recommended Tier 3. The order recommended Tier 3. The species was accepted under the new clause as a covenant-capable people, with full personhood, full trade access, full immunity from the salvage clause, and a permanent citation in the matrix referencing the 47 letters of Henry Wexler and the 47 letters of Ana Reyes in the pen, and the unsent 48th letter, and the worn smooth place on the wrong side of the barrel. The archive logged the decision. Esh-Karal returned to Bay 9 at the 22nd hour of the local Bay cycle. The pen was still on the reading plate, 46 grams. The vessel lifted it. There was a thing the matrix had not asked for, and the protocol had not required, and which Esh-Karal had been carrying in the locomotion shell during the walk back. A respect gesture. The stratigraphic order required its vessels to perform a respect gesture at the close of any read that had altered a clause. The gesture had to be specific to the case. It could not be a routine. It could not be a phrase. It had to be an act. Esh-Karal had been thinking about the act for the entire walk. The vessel turned to the Bay's communications array and filed a request. The request was unprecedented. The Bay's protocols would have to be modified to permit it. The order would have to authorize it. The humans would have to be notified. Esh-Karal requested that the pen be returned to Ana Reyes in Pittsburgh, in the care facility on the 3rd floor of the building that had once been a Catholic girls' school, with the unsent 48th letter, with a note from the archive containing one line, "The vessel's choice." The order approved the request within 9 minutes. Esh-Karal wrote the line. The pen arrived in Pittsburgh on a Tuesday. The care facility on Forbes Street received it on October 12, 2003, at 2:47 in the afternoon. The Concordance Courier, a humanoid carrier authorized for human contact, dressed in a coat that had been studied for 2 months to match the local fashion of widowers, placed the package on the small table beside Ana Reyes's chair and stepped back. The package contained the 1947 Schaffer Lifetime fountain pen, gold-tipped, worn smooth on the left side of the barrel. The sealed envelope, containing the 48th letter, never opened, and a single sheet of paper on which Esh-Karal had written, in English in the archive's standard hand, "Mrs. Reyes, we have read the record. We are sorry for the length of time it took us to understand it. The pen is yours. The letter is yours. We did not open it, the archive. Anna Reyes was 81 years old. She read the note. She lifted the pen and weighed it in her hand. She held it for a long time. Then she opened the desk drawer beside her chair and took out a black and white composition notebook, college-ruled, identical to the one Henry Wexler had kept, and identical to her own, and turned to a fresh page. She did not open the 48th letter. She picked up the pen, uncapped it, and discovered that the ink chamber was empty. The courier had not refilled it. The courier had not been authorized to refill it. Anna Reyes reached into the same drawer and took out a bottle of Schaffer Scrip Royal Blue ink, sealed, dated 1988, that she had bought the same year Henry had bought his, because she had known the 47th letter would be the last. She filled the pen. She wrote one line in the composition notebook on a fresh page on October 12, 2003 in the afternoon. Henry, I always knew. I kept the day held. Anna. She closed the notebook. She placed the pen, capped, on the table beside the unopened 48th letter. She did not open the letter. She had not needed to open it. She had known what was in it since 1944. She sat in her chair for the remainder of the afternoon. The courier left at 3:14 in the afternoon. The bay logged the delivery. The archive logged the close of the case. The Matrix's Covenant Capacity Axis was activated for species classification effective the next concordance cycle. The order added one footnote to the Tuesday keeping clause in the official record, which read, "The clause was earned. The clause is paid." Eshkarol filed the final read. The vessel did not yet know, and would not know for another 7 concordance cycles, when the human population census was integrated into the Matrix, that 8.4 billion humans were now classified as covenant capable, and that the archive would, in the coming century, be required to identify and catalog an estimated 400 million Tuesday keepings in active maintenance across the species. The order had no protocol for an audit at that scale. The order would need to build one. The clause that had been written for 2 people in Pittsburgh would have to be enforced, recorded, and respected across a planet of practitioners, most of whom would never know that anyone was reading them. The vessel filed the projection. The archive accepted it. Eshkarol closed Bay 9 at the 23rd hour of the local bay cycle. The pen had been delivered. The clause had been written. The species had been accepted. The vessel had a sentence in the personal log that the Matrix had not required, that the order had not requested, and that no future vessel would raid because personal logs were not load-bearing in the archive. The sentence read, "He used the wrong hand on purpose." She knew he did. Neither of them said, "That is the architecture." The vessel filed the sentence. The bay went dark. In Pittsburgh, a woman of 81 sat in a chair beside a small table with a pen on it and an unopened letter beside the pen. The window faced Forbes Street. The chestnut tree on the corner had grown 6 feet since 1989. The bread was up. It was Tuesday. She thought of him. She thought of him on Tuesdays.